Hi, so I'm going to give a brief summary today. If you want the full 30-minute teaching, check the link below. But was Jesus a real person? Was he a historical figure that really walked this earth? Is the question I want to answer. And I think there's a lot of good reasons that we base our faith on it, but also just what the academic community has come to. And so there's a couple of quick things. Jesus right now, there's 4 billion followers of Jesus here on the earth. And they're not all Christians. Other religions like Islam and others as well believe in Jesus, and that doesn't even start to touch the other 3 billion people that believe that Jesus was a historical figure. They may or may not, but within just alone, there's 4 billion people that have a belief that he was a historical person. And so historians, whether they're believers or not, really need to pay attention to Jesus. They need to take time to really look at the evidence for Jesus's life. And so we start to look, and there's both evidence within the Gospels and then also other written sources and things that talk about Jesus. And I'm going to skim through a lot of these again. Like if you want the longer teaching, check out below. Again, the Gospels were written in living memory of when Jesus was here on earth within about 40 years. And so we have these written accounts of Jesus. Um, and so is that enough, or are there other texts? Well, there was actually other people that wrote about Jesus. Again, we want to start a little bit. 99.99% of peasants or merchant class, there's no real archaeological data or evidence for them. And so we don't expect much. Again, in Jesus' time, that's 2,000 years ago, there's not even a lot written necessarily about a lot of major figures of his day, let alone people that maybe didn't have, position. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a Caesar. He was a religious figure. And so we see people like Agrippa, Herod the Great, only having short glosses in the historical texts. We see other uh, religious figures. One of the most prominent was Hillel, and we don't even see anything written by Josephus about him. And so, again, there's not necessarily going to be a lot of evidence, but we do see Josephus writing about Jesus, and he talks about him in his writing. And this was in between 37 and 100 A.D. And we do know that he had, as a historian of his time, does talk about that. We also have these other 3 or 4 areas like Roman newspapers or some of these other philosophers of that time period that wrote about Jesus as a historical figure. So again, did Jesus really exist within the scholarly and academic world that study histories and evidences and really look at what's probable more than what's provable? They actually come out almost without exception within the scholarly circles and histories. This is liberal scholars as well, not just evangelical scholars or something. This is within the liberal historical or scholarly community. They believe that Jesus was an actual human figure. Okay, and so, again, there's no reason for his movement to invent him. These narratives that they invented were not terribly positive for their own lives, right? To talk about a treasonous leader who got killed and resurrected, and most of them were actually at some point executed. And so, this was a suicidal narrative that they continue to propagate. They cost them something, and so that is another reason. And then we also have people that are outside of Jesus, basically his haters that wrote about him as well. They accused him of being a magician and leading people astray, but they did write about him as a historical figure. And so if we're just trying to get evidence, we have quite a bit of evidence that Jesus was a historical figure. The scholars actually have a whole list of things they agree on. They believe that his disciples believed that he died and rose again. They believe he started a movement. They believe he was a Galilean Jew from Nazareth, that he went around and was known as a healer and exorcist, and mostly reached out to the marginalized and poor. And so there's not a lot of disagreement in those areas. Now, where they disagree is on how much of the Gospels they believe are verbatim sayings of Jesus, or if they're paraphrases. There's some minimalist approaches like the Jesus seminars that believe almost nothing. They discuss the chronology of the Gospels, whether or not they're in time order or not, and those kinds of things are up for some debate. Again, it's a much larger discussion that I'm going to kind of skip for now. Some people hold that everything in the Gospels is exact fact, verbatim Jesus' sayings. Others believe there's paraphrases, and others then just don't believe he actually even said that he's just kind of a moral example people made up. But there's not a lot of those within the scholarly community. Most of them do believe he was a historical figure from Nazareth. But then we look in the popular world, right? And this is a survey from 2015 in England. So, and 40% to 46% of young people in England don't believe or aren't sure Jesus was a real person. So we go from almost all academics believing Jesus was a real person based on their understanding of how to interpret history, look at the facts and things. And then we have 40% of the population that just says, I don't even know that Jesus ever was even a person. So what's gone on there? Why haven't these academics facts been able to be translated for the general population so that they understand what the going understanding is and this. And so that's where apologetics come in. That's our part of describing who Jesus is. Again, a lot of times in the populist approach, it's just the way people feel. They kind of attack each other. Well, that's a dumb idea, right? They use ad hominem arguments. They maybe only talk to their own preach to their own choir, right? You kind of have your own friend circle and you have people that believe the same thing you do. So you maybe aren't exposed to a lot. And so that's why we kind of want to reach out and give a little bit of the academic side sometimes as we present things. Again, this is where the gospel starts, right? We have to start that Jesus was a real person. And so we kind of are have all these ideas of how history and academics have approached this, right? We have historians who how they tell their stories. They understand how that works, and they understand that the narratives are not made up stories or novels. They just don't read that way. They actually have historical information in the Gospels about a person, and then we can compare the Gospels to other biographies of the time. And I'm not going to talk about this here, but there was a lot of other people writing biographies at that time. And how were those biographies? Did they have historical information? And they did. And so, again, in 1992, there was a skeptic, Dr. Burridge of Cambridge, who set out to prove that the Gospels were not ancient biographies, that they were legends or stories or just moral examples. And what he came up with as a historian and someone who knew how to really look at genre was that they actually were historical biographies, that Jesus was a real person, and that these were meant to be historical. And so this became the academic position in 1992. This is a citable academic position. This is kind of what's held out there, is that the Gospels can be treated as historical biographies. Now, there is some creative license within that, but in general, they were not fictitious. They were not novels. They were not stories. So that's just kind of our conclusion. And then just on the other side of this, we can present all these facts in our apologetics, but really one of the major points of Jesus being a historical figure is that our lives have been transformed. Societies have been transformed. We see a change from idolatry to Christianity in a lot of places. We see the gospel really changing lives, personal lives. And so not only do we need to talk about the historical Jesus as a person, but we need to talk about our personal relationship and what happened when we came to know Jesus and how he transformed our lives and how real he is still today, the living God in our hearts and in our midst. And so that is the other part of the story that we get to share. So if you want the longer teaching, again, I'll put the link below.